Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Kof Ches Amud Aleph, starting Daf Kof Zayin Amud Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. The Gemara recorded Rabbi Yochanan's statement that a zar, a non-kohen, who prepares the ma'arocha, the pyre on the mizbech, is chayiv misa b'dei shomayim. Rabbi Zera challenged that statement and said, do we find in avodah that's ksheira balayla is psula bezar? It's not a chashav avodah if it's performed at night. How can a zar be chayiv misa b'dei shomayim? To which the Gemara amended Rabbi Yochanan's statement to say that a zar, a non-kohen, who prepares the shtei gezirei eitzim on the mizbeach, the 2 logs on the mizbeach, he's chayiv misa b'dei shomayim. The Gemara now presents another version of that statement. V'ika da'amrei. Now the Gemara challenges Rabbi Yochanan's original statement again that said that a zar who prepares the ma'arocha, the pyre, on the mizbeach, he's going to be chayiv misa b'dei shomayim. Gemara now says, maski for Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera challenges that statement. V'chi yesh lecha avoida sheyesh achareha avoida upsula bezar. Do we find an avoida that is not considered to be an avoida tama, an avoida that has an avoida afterwards that would be chayiv a zar misa b'dei shomayim? We learn out from the psukim earlier, va'avadetem, an avodah tama is going to chayiv a misa b'dei shomayim for the zar, but not an avodah that has an avodah afterwards, and therefore this that we're saying, Rabbi Yochanan, that a zar that puts the woods on the ma'arocha, that's not a complete avodah, since you have afterwards the shtei gezirei eitzim placed on the pyre. Says the Gemara in Daf Kof Ches Amud Aleph at the top, V'harei evarim pedarim, but we find evarim pedarim, which is an avodah considered to be a concluding avodah tama, that is, yes, mechayev a zar misa b'dei shomayim, and yet it has also the trumas hadeshin that follows it. In other words, there is a removal of those ashes from the burning of the evarim and the pedarim that was done that night before. The Gemara answers, Soif avodah diyamamahi. The evarim pedarim really concludes the avodah of the day, and therefore it's considered to be a soif, a avodah tama, the end of that avodah, and therefore the trumas hadeshin that comes afterwards is separate. Ask the Gemara, trumas hadeshin itself. Trumas hadeshin is considered to be a avodah tama, a concluding avodah, and yet we have the hoitzos hadeshin afterwards. So too over here, then when it comes to the avodah of the ma'arocha, so that should be considered to be avodah tama, even though you have shtei gezirei eitzim placed afterwards. Answers the Gemara, tchilas avodah diyamamahi. The trumas hadeshin is the beginning of that avodah, the hainu, the carbon tami shel shachar, and therefore the hoitzos hadeshin is not significant in that avodah of tchilas hashachar, of the carbon tami shel shachar. Hoitzos hadeshin sometimes is required when there's in a mass, a great amount of ashes, but since it's not normally the daily type of routine, therefore the trumas hadeshin is considered to be avodah tama, the last avodah. So the Gemara therefore says elakasha. No, before that says the Gemara, the Amar Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara proves that trumas hadeshin is in fact the beginning of the avodah of the day, because kidesh yadav the trumas hadeshin, when the kohen he washes his hands and truly is also his feet before the trumas hadeshin. So l'machar eino tzarich lekadesh shekvar kidesh mitchilas avodah. In other words, even the opinion that requires normally the kohen to wash his hands and his feet anew before, if he washed it beforehand, when daybreak comes, he has to wash it again. But if he washed it for the trumas hadeshin, then he doesn't have to wash it again, even if daybreak had transpired. So we see, says the Gemara, that indeed, from Rabbi Yochanan's statement, that the Kidesh Yadayim V'Raglayim is mitchilas avodah. It's the beginning, it's considered to be the beginning of the avodah. Ela kasha, therefore the Gemara says that which Rabbi Zera indeed asked on Rabbi Yochanan, that where do we find that an avoid that's not choshev because it's not considered an avoid tama should be chayiv a zar, and therefore the zar that's setting the maracha on the mizbeach, the pyre on the mizbeach, should not be mechayiv misa b'dei shomayim. Ella, says the Gemara, to then reassess and amend Rabbi Yochanan's question. Eli itmar hachi itmar. This is what Rabbi Yochanan said. Omar of Asiyam Rabbi Yochanan. Zar shesida shnei gezirei eitzim chayiv hoyo va'avoida tamahi. The zar, the non-kohen, who prepares the two logs on the mizbeach, which is after the ma'aracha, that itself is going to be the avodah tama, and that will be chayiv the zar misa b'dei shomayim. Maskif lo Rava. Rava says the following question: Elameyata, if you're going to say it's a choshev avodah because the avodah tama that the zar is chayiv for, then it would require its own casting of lots. Tiboy pious. Ask the Gemara on Rava, what do you mean? V'lo boy pious? Do we not find that there is a casting of lots in regards to the Shnei Gezirei Eitzim V'Hatanya? It says in the Brayso, Misha Zocha B'Trumas Hadesh Yizke B'Sidur Shnei Gezirei Eitzim. One who wins the lot of the Avoida of Trumas Hadeshin, he also does the Avoida of the Shnei Gezirei Eitzim. So you see that indeed that does require lots, the Shnei Gezirei Eitzim. Gemara says, Hochi Kamar Yefaisu Lo B'Fnei Atzma. That is only agav the pious that is performed for the Trumas Hadeshin. But as Rava, there should be a separate pious for the Shnei Gezirei Eitzim. If indeed it has the chashivus, because it's avodah tama, it's mechayiv azar misa b'dei shomayim, so there should be chayiv also its own casting of lots. The Gemara says kida amrinon, meaning to say that indeed we would separate its own lots for the Shnei Gezirei Izim. But the Gemara explained earlier that once they casted lots for the Trumas Hadeshin and people were not coming, the Kohanim were not coming early in the morning, they needed an incentive to then bolster their coming in the morning and performing the Trumas Hadeshin. So therefore they added that in addition to the Trumas Hadeshin, the one who wins that pious will also then do the Ma'aracha and the Shtei Gezirei Eitzim. Now the Gemara challenges, you said that there are two components. That's an avodah tama, and that a zar is going to be chayiv misa de shemayim. Ask the Gemara, remember, the avodah tama v'zar chayiv aleh misa boy pious. That's what requires a pious, because that's considered to be a choshev avodah. But ein zar chayiv aleh misa lo boy pious. But if it's not mechayiv a zar, then it's not going to require, it's the casting of its own lots. V'arei shchita, we find the first pious is for, the second pious rather, is for different avodas, beginning with the shchita. And there, a non-kohen can perform the shchita. So you see clearly, even when the zar is not chayiv misa, even though there's a casting of lots. Answers the Gemara, shiny shchita, the tchila avoida di yamamahi. Shchita is different because it has its chashivus. It's the beginning of the avoida di yamama, the korban tomi shel shachar, and therefore it requires its own casting of lots. Lememra, the avoida tamo. Now the Gemara goes the other way. You said two components. You said it's an avoida tamo that is mechayiv misa v'dei shomayim for the zar. Now the Gemara asked, what about the fact that you're saying avodah tama requires pious, the casting of lots, but otherwise not? Lememro, the avodah tama boy pious, avodah sheish acharei avodah loy boy pious. But if the avodah has an avodah afterwards, it's not avodah tama, it would not require casting of lots. V'arei evarim pedorim, the evarim pedorim, that is the fourth casting of lots, the fourth pious, and it is not considered to be avodah tama l'chara because afterwards you have the removal of the ashes. Says the Gemara, soif avoida di yamamahi. It is considered to be a concluding avoida, and avoida tama, because it's the end of the day's avoida. I asked the Gemara, hare Trumas Hadeshin, but Trumas Hadeshin, l'chara, is not an avoida tama, because after all, when you're finished with the Trumas Hadeshin, the separating of the ashes, there's also the taking out of the ashes, the hoitzos hadeshin. So therefore, l'char it's not a concluding avodah, it's not avodah tama, and yet there's a pious. The first pious is designated for the Trumas Hadeshin. Answering the Gemara, Mishum Masechet Shahaya. The Gemara says because there was a Masechet that took place. Really, we didn't want to initially require lots. We would say the first kohen that comes and he'll do the Trumas Hadeshin. When there's more kahanim, then they'll make a foot race. Once we saw that brought a sakana, as the Mishnah records, that one kohen pushed off another kohen from the kevesh, who caused him to break his leg. The Brisa says even more. There was an incident when the two kohanim were running side by side, and one kohen was afraid he's going to lose the foot race, so he took out a knife and he plunged into the heart of this fellow kohen. So then we required a pious because of the Masechet Shahaya. Now the Gemara says we can prove that Rabbi Yochanan, who says that a zar is chayiv misa b'dei shamayim when he prepares the shnei gezirei eitzim, because it's an avodah tama, the Gemara says, l'char, we have a proof for that from the following Mishnah, which is the beginning of the next parak. Omar Marzuta v'tema Rav Ashi af ananami tanina. We also taught this in the Mishnah. Omar lehem amamuna. It says that the Sagan HaKayanim was in charge. He says early morning, go out, you Kohanim, and see im higia zman hashchita. If the time of shchita has come, in other words, go determine if there's some light coming from the east. V'ilu zman sidur gezirei eitzim lektoni, and yet doesn't say anything about the zman of gezirei eitzim. Why? L'chara, if it's the early morning that they're trying to determine, so it should mention the shnei gezirei eitzim. The fact that it doesn't mention it must be that the shnei gezirei eitzim is an avodah at night, which is mashma, like Rabbi Yochanan, that's an avodah tama. It's a concluding type of avodah. And therefore, not like the other opinions that say that since the Eivarim are going to be on the Mizbeach afterwards, it's considered to be not avodah tama. The Gemara says you have no proof for Rabbi Yochanan from this Mishnah because hach the lesle takanta kitani, v'hach the isla takanta loy kitani. The reason why the Mishnah mentions specifically the shchita of the korban tamid shel shachar is because that's irreversible. If we make a mistake and think that it's daytime when it's not, it was really only the light of the levana of the moon, then it's possible the carbon that was brought. It has to be burnt instead. So therefore it's irreversible, therefore the Mishnah mentions it. But in regards to the Shnei Gezirei Eitzim, if the Kohen was putting that on the Mizbeach, even though he should not have done so because it was not yet daytime, so he can merely then take it off and put back on after daytime. It's reversible. Therefore the Mishnah doesn't mention it. So we have no proof for Rabbi Yochanan. Hadron aloch barishoina. The second parak begins as follows. Omar lehem amamuna. Sorry, the third parak begins as follows. Omar lehem amamuna. Tzu'u uru'u. Go out, as we just quoted this Mishnah before. The Mamuna here is referring to the Sgan HaKohanim. He's the second in charge. He was the one that the Mishnah had mentioned in the beginning of the Masechta, that we set aside another Kohen in case the Kohen Gadol will become Posel if he sees Keri, for example. So therefore, this is the Sgan HaKohen that we're referring to. He was the one who was assisting the Kohen Gadol, and he was also then the one over here that was in charge in the morning. And he said, Su'uru'u to the other Kohanim, go out and see, im higia zman hashchita. If the time of the shchita, the korban tamid shel shachar, has come. In other words, go determine if there's any light coming from the east. Im higia, if indeed, then the time has come, then haraya oime barkai. Then the Kohen will declare barkai. Barkai over here refers to the little beginning of light at one point on the eastern side, which is basically Alas HaShachar. Masya ben Shmuel argues, and he says that it's not just one area in the east, Alas HaShachar, that is good enough, but rather, Heyer Pnei Kol HaMizrach, it has to be the entire horizon is lit up, which is a later point in time. Ad Shebet Chevron, he asked, until it has come to Chevron, that means the south of Yerushalayim. It has come that much light. V'hu oimer hein, and he says yes. Now over here, it doesn't just say, the Mefarshim point out, ad shebechevron. It said ad, it doesn't say ad shebechevron. It said, it could have said ad shechevron. But it says ad shebechevron, is mashma in Chevron. It's referring to the zechus, an allusion to the zechus of the avois that are buried in Chevron, the Masa Machpelah, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and the Imahois. V'lamo hutzrechu lekach. Ask the Mishnah, why do we need to be told this? Why do they have to do this every morning in the Beis Hamikdash to determine that it's time for the Shchitas HaKorban Tomishal Shachar? L'chara, why did they have to go up and determine there's some light coming out? Or even more, why, according to Masi ben Shmuel, does it have to be the entire east is lit up with light? Answers the Mishnah, Shepam achas Allah mor halavana. One time the light came from the moon. V'dimu shehir mizrach v'shachtu es atomi v'otziu lebeis hasreifa. They thought it was coming from the sun, and instead, therefore, they shechted the korban tamid shel shachar, thinking that it was the daytime. And when they determined that it was really not day yet, then it was postal, and they had to then burn the carbon in the Beis HaSreifa. Now the Mishnah goes back to the Seder Hayoim of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim. Haridu Kohen Gadol leBeis HaTvila. They bring down the Kohen Gadol to the Beis HaTvila, and that's on the roof of the Beis HaParva, the Lishkos HaParva. And that's where he then is toivel, the first tevila of the day. Now the Mishnah brings a conclusion, a klal, which has to take place throughout the entire year in the Avodas Beis Hamikdash, as follows. And this is not only through the Kohen Gadol, but all kohanim that do the avodah. Zeh klal haya b'mikdash. Kol ha-meisach es raglav is referring to somebody who makes gedolim. That means that he defecates, whether it's a kohen again or Kohen Gadol. Even though he's already been doing the avodah, and he already did kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, he already did tevila before he entered the azara, he still is toned tevila. He's required to make another tevila before going back inside and doing the avodah. V'kol hamatil mayim, and anybody who then urinates, ton kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Again, even though he has already then been mekadesh yadayim v'raglayim before he then did the avodah, but if he needs to then urinate mimatil yamayim, then he must once again be mekadesh yadayim v'raglayim before then doing the avodah again.